Welcome back to the video. In our previous video, we studied about lifespan and the different types of reproducing modes, that was asexual and sexual reproduction. In this video, we are going to learn the different phases of live and sexually reproducing animals. We will be focusing on events in sexual reproduction. Before starting it, let me give you a gist of the different phases which we also studied in the last video. So the first phase is known as the juvenile phase. Please mark it down. So it says that all organisms have to reach a certain stage of growth maturity in their life before they can reproduce sexually. That means before you are mature, you are attaining that period of time where your body is growing in terms of weight, in terms of height, your hormones are changing. So before maturity, you will see a lot of morphological changes in your body. In animals, this period of growth is called juvenile phase, whereas in plants, it's known as vegetative phase. This phase is of variable durations in different organisms. Okay, so mark it over here that for animals, it is known as juvenile phase, and for plants, it is known as vegetative phase. Okay, so the next phase after the juvenile phase is the reproductive phase. It says that the end of juvenile phase is marked by the beginning of the next phase called reproductive phase. Okay, so in animals, the juvenile phase is followed by morphological and physiological changes prior to reproductive behavior. So basically, the time when we get mature and we start to reproduce, we see a lot of changes in our body. In shapes, we observe the secondary sexual characters being developed. And after the reproductive phase comes your senescence phase. So what is senescence phase? After reproductive maturity, all organisms enter into senescence phase. Definition of senescence may be defined as the period between reproductive maturity and the death of the organism. So in simple words, you can say senescence means old age. Okay? Coming to your NCERT book, the topic over here is events in sexual reproduction. So it's written, after attainment of maturity, all sexually reproducing organisms exhibit events and processes that have remarkable fundamental similarity. Even though the structures associated with sexual reproduction are indeed very different, the events of sexual reproduction, though elaborate and complex, follow a regular sequence. Sexual reproduction is characterized by the fusion of the male and the female gamete, we know, that is known as fertilization. And after the fertilization, what happens? The formation of zygote takes place and it is followed by embryogenesis. Okay, for convenience, these sequential events may be grouped into three distinctive stages, namely the pre-fertilization, fertilization and the post-fertilization event. As I told you earlier, in this video we are only covering the pre-fertilization event, which consists of your gametogenesis and your gamete transfer. Okay, now let's go back to our notes. See, you can see an arrow marked over here that within the reproductive phase the sexual reproduction occurs. Okay, so beginning with your gametogenesis, let us discuss. So basically, gametogenesis is the process of formation of two types of gametes, males and females. Okay, so the जो process आपका होता है जहाँ पे पूरा formation हो रहा है आपके male and female gametes का, और जो gametes होते हैं वो कैसे होते हैं? वो haploid cells होते हैं. Okay, the male and the female gametes are haploid cells. So in some algae, the two gametes are so similar in appearance that it is not possible to categorize them into male and female gametes. Okay, so let me show you an example over here. In your NCERT book, you will see a figure is drawn, figure A. It shows isogamous of cladophora. That means you cannot distinguish whether which one is male or female. The characters, the morphological characters are same. Since we cannot categorize between them, so they are called homogametes. Okay, however, in majority of sexually reproducing organisms, the gametes produced are of two different types. And what do we call it? We call it heterogamous. So example, a very common example is Homo sapiens. You can look over here. The male and the female gametes are very different. Okay, next point says sexual reproduction in an organism generally involves fusion of gametes from two different individuals, but this is not always true. In your NCERT book, it says that in such organisms, the male gamete is called the anthracite or the sperm, and the female gamete is known as the egg or the ovum, which is usually very common in majority of sexually reproducing organisms. Okay, now coming to the sexuality of organisms, whether it is unisexual, whether it is bisexual, homotelic, monoecious, dioecious, we'll be learning different terms. Talking about the sexuality of different organisms, in several fungi and plants, the term homotelic and monoecious is used to describe the term bisexual condition. So, what do we understand? The term bisexual condition actually means that there is a separate plant for the male and the female. Okay, there will be two plants. One, you can categorize them as male and female. Whereas in case of heterotelic and dioecious, these are the terms which are used to describe the unisexual condition. That means that the male and the female reproductive part is present in the same plant. Okay, so in flowering plants, it says that the unisexual male flower is staminate. Staminate basically means bearing stamens. That is the male reproductive part of a plant, while the female is pistillate. That means it is bearing pistils. Okay. Okay, so this line says that in some flowering plants, both male and female may be present on the same individual, that is monoecious, or separate individuals, that is dioecious. So the term monoecious is actually defining the unisexuality of a flowering plant, and the term dioecious is actually defining the bisexuality of a flowering plant. Understood? Now you can see some examples. Some examples of monoecious plants are, please mark it down, cucurbits and coconuts. And dioecious plants are papaya and date palm. So I hope this term has been made clear to you. So here are some special points. A parent produces gametes by mitotic division. Okay, mitotic. Please mark it down. Don't get confused with meiotic and mitotic division. Several organisms belonging to Monera, fungi, algae, and bryophytes. Monera, fungi, algae and bryophytes have haploid plant body. Mark it. But in organisms belonging to which groups? Pteridophyte, gymnosperms and angiosperms, and most of the animals including human beings, the parent body is diploid. Understood? Over here it's written that it is obvious that meiosis, the reduction division, okay, meiosis, the reduction division has to occur if a diploid body has to produce haploid gametes. Okay, since the parent body in human beings also, which I read earlier, is diploid, so what happens? Meiosis occurs. So in diploid organisms, specialized cells called meiocytes, okay, mark it down, meiocytes, that means gamete mother cells, undergo meiosis, and what happens? From diploid it gets converted into haploid. Okay, so at the end of meiosis, one set of chromosome is incorporated into each gamete. Understood? Okay, so your next part of the pre-fertilization event after gametogenesis is gamete transfer. First point says in majority of organisms the male gamete is motile and the female gamete is stationary. So you have to remember this like always, that the male is motile and the female is stationary. What does the term motile means? Motile means that it is movable. Okay, and the female is always, you can see in human beings also, the ovum or the egg is stationary, whereas the sperm has got mobility in it. Okay. Next point says that in several simple plants like algae, bryophytes and pteridophytes, water is the medium through which the gamete transfer takes place. Now what happens? Basically the males and the females both will release their own gametes in the water body, and through the water they will fuse together and form the zygote. So a large number of males, however, fail to reach the female gametes. To compensate the loss of male gametes during transport, the number of the male gametes produced is 1,000 times the number of female gametes. Now comes the topic pollination. So what happens in bisexual self-fertilizing plants, for example peas, transfer of the pollen grains to the stigma is relatively easy as anthers and stigma are located very close to each other. ओके तो जो आपका एंथर और स्टिग्मा है वो आप सेल्फ फर्टिलाइजिंग प्लांट्स में बहुत क्लोजली लोकेटेड रहता है. So pollen grains soon after they are shed come in contact with the stigma. But what happens in unisexual plant? The male and the female part, जैसा कि मैंने बताया कि जो मेल और फीमेल प्लांट्स रहेंगे वो अलग अलग रहते हैं, वो सेपरेट रहते हैं. तो इस केस में क्या होगा, आपका क्रॉस पॉलिनेशन होने वाला है. सो व्हाट हैपेंस ओवर देयर, a specialized event called pollination facilitates transfer of pollen grains to the stigma. So pollination term के बारे में हम लोग ने अपनी जूनियर क्लासेस में भी बहुत बार पढ़ा है. After the pollen grains have reached the stigma, what happens? The pollen grains germinate on the stigma and it grows into the pollen tube, okay, and then this pollen tube carrying the male gamete reaches the ovule, and after that it discharges the male gamete near the egg. So the fertilization gets completed and hence zygote is formed. The next topic, that is fertilization and post-fertilization events, are discussed in your next video, that is video 3. With this we come to the end of our video, and if you want the PDFs, do comment down in the comment section and I'll be providing the links of the PDFs. Thank you so much.